Hey, if you are new to the channel, I want to say welcome and quick little intro on me before I get started here is I have over $1 billion worth of sales revenue that I've generated across the board for all different kinds of clients, going from small mom and pop shops all the way to publicly traded companies. And so all the information that I'm sharing here is based off of data that we've actually gotten on a separate YouTube channel called CProGrowth. But in this scenario here, we get this question a lot, which is one ad set versus multiple ad sets, and what's the reasoning as to why you might only want one ad set or why you might want to do multiple. Now, full transparency, we lean more to the one ad set variation. However, we do know there's scenarios where multiple ad sets might make sense temporarily, but I'm going to give you guys the reasons why, and so you can better understand how to do this in the first place and what things to look out for, because this is just the start of your journey and there's a lot to cover here. So I want to jump into it right away. So the first thing is one ad set versus multiple on Meta. We're going to go over the basics. So from the Meta disruptors, and if you don't know who they are, the Meta disruptors are the people inside of Meta that are actually working for Meta that help the largest 20 highest spend accounts inside the United States, just give them the information about the algorithm and sort of help them steer in the right direction. So it's not like your standard rep. These are actually the people that work on the algorithm itself and have inside understanding actually as to what the algorithm's doing in the first place. So it's not just like a generic, like, person's going to give you like sort of a SOP on what they would recommend. They are highly knowledgeable on the product and will give us early insights. And so I can share that with you guys. So the biggest thing that they told us right off the bat is that ad sets will deduplicate. And so what that means is that if I have one ad set over here and another one over here, and this ad set has the highest spend and the highest ad rank, then what tends to happen is this ad set over here will get all of the attribution, right? So it's going to deduplicate, meaning that if a user saw both ad sets, it's going to pick the winner. And it's going to say, okay, I don't care if ad set loser, I guess you can say, showed an ad multiple times, the one that has the best rank is going to take as much attribution as possible. And so what this tends to lead to is, or why this is a potential issue, is because you will get yourself in a scenario where you might not think that the creative in ad set 2 or the losing ad set is, underperforming because ad set 1 has all the, ad spend and the attribution and everything. And so you might say, oh, this ad isn't working, I'm no longer going to run it. And then you jump to the next idea for the next ad, when in reality, that ad could have been actually driving all of the revenue. And you notice that your ad set 1 that was winning is now no longer getting the good results, and you're confused and you're trying to figure out why that's the case because the other ad set showed no conversions or no ROAS or whatever you want to say. And so when it comes to that problem, this is sort of a larger issue in accounts, because at the end of the day, we don't want to look at ROAS, we don't want to look at CPA to determine the health of the business, right? That's pretty straightforward there. So if you're still looking at in-platform, this is what I mean by this is sort of the start of your journey. But if you're already familiar with P&Ls and understanding how to break that down to sort of dissect what is happening from the ad itself, then that's obviously a different story. So what are the benefits of deduping? Well, deduping allows you to better understand the funnel and understand what is sort of like your top, middle, and bottom funnel. And it's also beneficial to sort of steer the algorithm in a direction to sort of put everything in one ad set versus multiple. So the next thing is that we got to jump over to the Miro board because I want to show you guys sort of a visualization of this. There's a couple things that we want to look at. So what a lot of people tend to say is they say that you have an ABO and then you have a test ad set and then a core ad set or your main ad set, or let's just say the winning, I'll say winning core ad set. And so what that means is they say, oh, you have an ad set to test. You have an ad set that has the winners in it. And then you carry over the test ads to the winners. But the issue with that, like I was just mentioning, is that you don't necessarily have an understanding of each user's journey when it comes to the type of creative you're testing. So an example of this would be if I'm running a DPA ad, so think of it as just like a product static, that's probably going to pull more towards bottom of funnel. Whereas if I have something that's like a founder's video that's explaining the type of company you are, what you want to be perceived as, that's going to be more of a top of funnel ad. Now, we have to also understand on top of this that with Meta Andromeda, the points that a user's journey are in are very different from one another. So if I might be in the market more so than someone else for a pair of shoes, maybe someone is just now starting to feel like they want a pair of shoes, whereas I'm like, I want a pair of shoes, I'm already aware of it, I just want a brand, I want a new brand, whatever the case is. And so we both could be in the end going after the same thing, but I'm just further away or I'm closer to that decision than someone else. And so you have that layer that's happening as well as the creative layer of the type of creative that can be shown to a user. And so all that we can really control is obviously the creative. So we have to look for clues when it comes to that and better understand what's more of a top of funnel ad versus a middle of funnel ad versus a bottom of funnel ad. And this is more of the art form when it comes to meta and why I think it's extremely complicated to make creative decisions versus just setting up an ad account. Setting up an ad account's real easy, get things up and running real fast. However, trying to understand what's working and not working is very, very difficult. And so this is the reasons why. Now, if I were to run a testing ad set inside of a one ABO campaign and a winning core ad set. So I have the ones that I'm throwing in that are newly batched, and then I have the original core campaign. The issue that you're going to run into, like I just mentioned, is that when you launch these ads, they might serve to a top of funnel audience, or they might serve to a middle of funnel audience, or they might serve to a bottom of funnel audience. You have no idea. So even if you have a founder's video in here, they could still technically serve to a bottom of funnel audience. And so the biggest issue with this is that you don't necessarily know how the creative is performing because you don't know which audience it's being served to, and you have the issue of deduplication happening, right? So we're not sharing attribution. It's going to pick the winner or the ad that has the better ad rank and take as much credit as possible over to the other ad set. And so what this causes is a weird feedback loop where you might see an ad get the majority of spend over here, and then all of a sudden your core campaign starts to perform better and better. And so we can say, okay, obviously there's a correlation to potentially if the ads stayed the same in the winning core campaign, but the test ad set started to get a lot more budget, then we can kind of correlate, okay, this is most likely causing the effects on the core campaign. But we don't know if that's happening for sure or not. And so what I like to do in this scenario is I like to look at hook rate, outbound click-through rate, and amount spent. Now, I know that hook rate you can't necessarily look at for static imagery, so that's a little bit harder, but for videos, it's a lot easier to kind of figure out what's working and what's not working. So the first thing that I want to highlight, and I want to sort of give you guys sort of the walkthrough that I do when it comes to testing creative, is I like to have one ad set to start. And I like to do this in the majority of situations because it's extremely important to give the algorithm enough credit as possible to test new creative. I also like to have CAPI imports both for lead generation and e-commerce with edge tagging. And the reason for that, not to go into a whole thing about it, but it's a way for us just to filter in clean data and optimize towards new customers versus repeat customers. Because a lot of times, the better the creative looks, the more warm it tends to be. So when we are organizing this, I say, okay, in the beginning, we don't know where, let's assume that we don't have any products data. We have no idea what's going on. We just have a bunch of creative about the company and we're trying to get things up and running. And so I'm going to start from ground zero kind of thing. So we build out the concepts, so we understand, okay, what's the pain point, what's the general message of the brand, how can we solve that problem, and then are there specific products that we've done research on that we know we're going to work or have the best margin, right? So it's kind of a business decision there. Once that's figured out, we want to try to launch as many ads as possible, as many different styles of ads as possible into one ad set. So it's a CBO campaign with one ad set. So it's super, super straightforward. Now, the setup obviously is a little bit different. I'm not going to go through all that right now, but this is just going to give you the general idea. So once we have that core ad set figured out and we have a clear winner, meaning that the ad's getting the most spend, we're getting good results on the back end of the business, the P&L is looking great, and now we're more so just saying, okay, how can I make this better? How can I make this specific creative better than what I'm seeing now? Let's say that we scaled and the economies of scale, the ads starting to fatigue, or there's starting to be a little bit of a drop off on performance. We want to see if we can make things better, or we're just not at goal and we want to make things better, right? So two different scenarios there. Then what I would say is obviously we want to add in more creative. We don't want to pause creative. We want to add more volume in there to build out the funnel further. And now, like I said, this is where the art of it comes in because we want to make sure that we have top of funnel ads, middle of funnel ads, and bottom of funnel ads. And one thing that I like to do, and this is just good for any business, is FAQ ads. And so what that really means is that you're just saying, okay, a lot of people have this question about the product or the service. Can I answer it in an ad real quick for them in the first place? And then obviously educate them on my brand versus a competitor's brand and the benefits of it. And then it'll work them through the funnel because each individual is at a different part of their journey in the buying process and they have different questions too. Andromeda is really, really good at finding specific issues that people have and then showing solutions to it to then obviously win them over for your services or your product. So once we have that kind of dialed in, we say, okay, we have, as much creative in here as possible, and we're still seeing creative getting sucked up to the highest spend. So there's two scenarios typically. First scenario is the creative doesn't spend at all. And you're saying, what the heck? Okay, I can't test any new creative because I'm not seeing any results come in. The other scenario is that the creative does spend, however, it doesn't perform as good as the other creative that you have, the core campaign. The question then becomes, is the spend a high enough level of spend in order to justify the testing of that creative inside of the ad set? So if it can, then you have your answer right away and you just move and you add on to the next creative, right? So if you see the hook rate's not good, the outbound click-through rate's not good, and it's not a really high amount of spend, meaning that it's like kind of stagnant or like that 5%, 10% range, whatever you find deemable based on your budget, meaning that you have enough volume based on the data to sort of see a correlation there. If you don't have anything that's coming back from there, then obviously if all the metrics are looking worse in platform on engagement, you probably want to go back to the drawing board when it comes to that. And that's all into the, artistic side of it, of trying to understand why that ad did not work versus the winner. And so that could be obviously multiple factors. Now, so that's not really a problem, right? So most people, I would say half, not most, but half of the people are in that scenario, right? You have one creative that's winning, or a set of creative or a message that's winning, and then you cycle in a new creative, and then that creative is no longer, it's tested and it's not working. The other scenario is that you now have a creative that is not being tested, and you're like, what the heck is going on? I'm unable to test an ad inside of the core ad set because the main one is getting all the credit for it as much as possible. No budget's flowing to my other creative. So a lot of times people say, oh, well, that's why you want to do a test ad set and you just want to look at that and see what to carry over based on the data. No. So what you want to do in this scenario is actually something a little bit different. So there is another two things you can do, and I'm actually going to draw this out real quick for you guys because I think that it's going to get confusing quick and I want to keep things as simple as possible. So we have two different scenarios, and I'm going to say, or I'll do take out the king creative. So this is one scenario, and then the other one is obviously test force spend. So we have two different routes that we can go if we are encountering the issue of if the creative is not testing and it's the exact same concept as the winning creative. There are two different ways you can go about this. So there is the high risk way, which is going to give you results real fast and you'll know right away, meaning like whatever the lag time is, you'll know within that lag time whether it's working or not. Or you can go kind of a more experimental route that's going to be a little bit harder to read, but a lot safer. So I'm going to go over the more aggressive route first, and then I'll cover the other one. So this one is pretty straightforward, meaning that you just take out the king creative, or you pause. I would say that's a lot better. Pause out the king creative. So what I mean by that is that whatever creative is getting the most spend, that's getting you really, really high on the, impact point of like, this is like majority of the budget's going over here, or towards the concept that you can say, okay, if we pause out this creative, what will happen? What will happen to the rest of the account? And obviously, if you have a creative that's very similar to that, that should take over the space and you should be able to test that. Like I said, super high risk, but you'll get a really fast feedback on if the hook rate's better, if the click-through rate's better, if the overall top-line metrics are better. How is that impacting the rest of the business? Now, this takes a lot of skill as well, too, because you want to make sure that you are matching the layer of the funnel that creative is in. So if it's a top-of-funnel ad, which tends to be the one that gets the most spend, you want to create a top of funnel ad as well too, based off of that. And so you want to kind of layer top of funnel against top of funnel, middle of funnel against middle of funnel, bottom of funnel against bottom of funnel kind of thing. Bottom of funnel is a lot easier to test, but anyways, we're going to stick with top of funnel for now because that's the biggest impact point. And your top of funnel ad can also be your middle and bottom of funnel ad. That could just be an educational ad that recycles and shows to multiple people and can convert them off of just that one ad because the message is really good. So like I said, there's a lot of art involved in this, but this is sort of the layer of how we sort of build that out. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Pause out the king creative, see how the new creative cycles in, and then when you want to reintroduce, or if you're like, hey, we did the test, I'm not 100% sure, maybe you want to turn back on the king creative in order to then see how they fight against one another in terms of the results that you're getting. Now, if you are noticing that the hook rate and the outbound click-through rate of the new creative is performing a lot better, I would argue to let it run and continue to see the lag time sort of catch back up, right? If you don't know what lag time is, it's just from when someone sees an ad to when someone converts. So you want to give that gap or give that time frame in order to see how the top of funnel ad is impacting the bottom of funnel of the business. You're not going to see good ROAS. You're not going to see good, conversions. It's just going to be how does this impact your P&Ls? So from there, we can say, okay, this is the high risk, high reward kind of scenario. The lower risk and not really high reward scenario is we test force ad spend. So this goes back into the traditional sense of we build out a separate ad set to force ad spend towards the creative to sort of activate it. Now, the problem with this is that the hook rate and the outbound click-through rate and the amount spent is going to be more amount spent is going to be in a controlled environment. So it's going to spend the money regardless. And I would say that amount spent is probably one of the biggest indicators of if a creative is working versus not. When it comes to hook rate and outbound click-through rate, this is where we get into that scenario I was mentioning earlier, where our top of funnel and middle of funnel and bottom of funnel are not, we don't necessarily know which audience is being pulled over to the test ad set. And a lot of this is going to be based off of the creative in here as well too. So we might see that, our outbound click-through rate's amazing because it's a bottom of funnel ad. And so we're farming the audience from the core campaign and just getting them to convert on the test campaign. Typically that won't happen if your spend is a lot higher on the core campaign. However, you might get a lot higher outbound click-through rate because people are clicking on it, but the attribution is still flowing to the other campaign. So that's also kind of hard to test. And then in addition to that as well too, the hook rate is going to be pretty much based off of which part of the funnel the user is also in the first place. So you can get a rough idea as to where things are holding, meaning that if the click-through rate or the outbound click-through rate is like completely horrible, meaning that if your top of funnel hook rate is, I don't know, let's say it's 50%, let's say it's amazing, and you look at these ads and they're saying a somewhat similar message or they're more of a top of funnel ad and you see like a 10% hook rate, okay, the ads are probably not good. But if you see something like a 30, 40, maybe it's a little bit closer to the other ad for a hook rate, then maybe you might have some playroom there. And so what I like to do after this is we say, okay, we forced ad spend. Then I move into carrying over the creative into the main ad set. And then from there I say, okay, we have tested the audience, meaning that the creative IDs carry over. So the ID that was in the test ad set is going to be the exact same audience and the exact same ID in the main ad set. We've already warmed it up. We've already tested it. We're carrying now the close to the same creatives into the other one. And then obviously we get spent from there. And then we build off of what data is being pulled from the clumping of them all together. The same issue can still occur though, where if we notice that the creative is not spending and we're running into an issue where, okay, we tested it, it's not spending. If the creative is lower in terms of what you're seeing on the other, meaning that, we're comparing a 50% versus like a 30%, and we see that dropping more and more and more in the core campaign, then we know it's probably just the indication of higher engaged audience, meaning bottom of funnel most likely went into this. Therefore, it's, the hook rate is actually maybe a lot lower on new customers and doesn't resonate as much. So then that's a losing creative. If it, doesn't spend and we know that it was like really close 50-50, then we might actually still have to go and pause out the king creative to fully test it if it's the same messaging or whatever layer that is in the funnel. So this is, like I said, things get really complicated when it comes to testing creative. A lot of times people will just say, oh, just run multiple ABO and just, test it against one another. But the idea that you can test the same audience against the same audience is just impossible. people are going to know about your brand. The algorithm's not going to be perfect on dissecting exactly, top, middle, and bottom of funnel users, even if you fed it the right data in the first place, right? Like, even if we fed in, and we do this, right? Even if we feed in the first click data, new customers based on edge tag, and we only say we want new customers to Meta, it's still going to get repeat customers. It's still going to happen. We just want to reduce that ratio. So when it comes to this is sort of the general SOP that I like to use, the general framework that I like to work from when it comes to testing creative, because like I said, this is an area where a lot of people will misread the data and not necessarily understand why their account's not growing. And a lot of cases tend to be because it's focused on bottom of funnel creative, right? It's focused on what does the platform say looks the best, right? Where are the most conversions flowing to? What's the best CPA? What's the best ROAS? And they lose the fact that you don't have to just capture demand on Meta. You want to generate your own demand, and that's how you get to those 9-figure brands, right? That at the end of the day, you can't just sit in middle and bottom of funnel. You have to be able to differentiate yourself from the entire marketplace. And Meta makes that so much easier than many other platforms in general. I would say, just full transparency, that Meta is, in my opinion, the strongest algorithm out there. Google, I would say, is second, but it's one of those things to where it's very important to look at this from a general funnel perspective and a general marketing perspective versus just a account management perspective and a numbers perspective, because there's a lot more that will convince someone to buy your product versus just what type of bid strategy you set up in the first place. So look for those high leverage impact points where you can really change the messaging of your creative to see if that changes the nature of your business, which then improves results. Or if you're already at a good place, stay within that framework and just build off of that. So anyways, hopefully this gave you guys a more in-depth analysis on how to look through the logic of how we test creative and how that functions for a business. And if you have any questions, like I said, feel free to comment below. We also have a free miniature course. It's all free. You just fill out our email. It's a little lead magnet for you marketers out there. But it's all free, and you guys can go through and see exactly how we measure accounts and what would be determining if the business is doing good or bad. There's templates in there, all that kind of stuff. So that'll be in the description. Check it out if you want, because this is just the start of your journey. And if you just look at ROAS or just look at CPA, there is so much more leverage points out there that you can get. So like I said, check it out. If you want to see proof of all this as well too, we have another YouTube channel called CProGrowth where we have all the information on there. But it's a really, really important area for you guys to look at first, because there's so much opportunity out there and people are just missing it. So thanks again.